My daughter-in-law looked me in the eye and told me I would die lonely in this cavernous house. She did not know that my husband and twins, who were supposed to be in their graves for 10 years, were waiting just behind the dining room door. As she sipped the wine she thought would kill me. I smiled because I knew the dead were about to walk in for dinner. My name is Evelyn Marlowe. I am 56 years old, and for the last 20 years, I have been a secretary at Harbourline Securities. It is a respectable job in Riverton Bay, a coastal town where the salt air eats away at the paint on the cars and the fog rolls in like a heavy curtain every evening. I live alone in a large wooden craftsman house perched on a cliff overlooking the grey waters of the Atlantic. To the tourists who drive by, my home looks like a postcard of American domestic bliss, with its wraparound porch and well-tended garden. But to me, it is a museum of a life that ended 10 years ago. The community here looks at me with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. They know the story. They know that my husband, Daniel, and our 16-year-old twins, Jude and Hannah, died in a horrific yacht explosion a decade ago. It was a tragedy that made the state news. There were no bodies to bury, only debris scattered across the waves and a memorial service attended by half the town. I was the survivor who stayed behind, the woman who had to work late that night and missed the boat. Since then, my world has shrunk. I have one son left, Liam, who lives in the city an hour away with his wife, Harper. My days are defined by a crushing routine. I come home from the office, change into comfortable clothes, and spend my evenings watering the rose bushes Daniel planted. I brew a pot of tea for one and sit in a house with 4 bedrooms, 3 of which are closed off and gathering dust. I have become accustomed to the silence. It is a thick, tangible thing that fills the hallways. Loneliness is not a sharp pain anymore. It is just a dull ache, a habit I cannot seem to break. My relationship with Liam has become a series of brief, strained interactions. He calls me once a week, usually while he is driving, his voice distracted. "How are you holding up?" "Mom?" he asks, but he never waits for a real answer. Our conversations are brittle. If I talk about the weather or my garden, he listens. But the moment the conversation drifts toward finances or the maintenance of this old house, his tone shifts. He becomes cold, almost clinical. "You know that roof is going to cost a fortune to fix." He often says, "You really need to think about downsizing." Then there is Harper. My daughter-in-law is a beautiful woman, always impeccably dressed, working as a parenting consultant at a private centre. She speaks with a soft, practiced cadence, the kind used to calm difficult children. She calls me Mom Evelyn with a sweetness that sets my teeth on edge. In her eyes, I do not see affection. I see calculation. She looks at my home not as a place of memories, but as a portfolio asset that is currently being underutilized. The phone rang at 4 in the afternoon. It was Liam. "Hi, Mum," he said, and I could hear the hesitation in his breath. "Harper and I are coming over for dinner tonight. Well, Harper has some important things she wants to discuss with you, about the future." I gripped the phone tighter. The future. "You mean you want to talk about selling my house again?" "It is not just about the house," Liam said, his voice rising in defense. "We need to make sure you are taken care of. Harper is she is worried about you living there all alone. I agreed to the dinner because I am a mother, and I cannot say no to my son, even when I dread his arrival. I began to prepare a roast chicken with lemon and rosemary, Liam's favourite dish from childhood. But as the smell of roasting meat filled the kitchen, the air felt heavy, oppressive. I felt a strange cocktail of excitement to see him and a deep, gnawing anxiety that tonight would be different. Before they arrived, I walked through the house to tidy up. That was when I noticed the small, unsettling changes. The spare set of house keys, which I always keep in a ceramic bowl on the entryway table, was gone. I searched the drawers, thinking my memory was failing me, but they were simply missing. Then, while clearing a stack of magazines from the coffee table, a glossy brochure slid out. It was for a company called Silver Horizon In-Home Care. I had never requested it. It must have been left behind by Harper during their last visit. Dignity for the aging. The cover read. I stood in the centre of my dining room, looking at the long mahogany table set for 3. The room was dim, the shadows stretching out from the corners. I ran my hand over the empty chair where Daniel used to sit. The silence of the house seemed to scream at me. Is this really it? I whispered to the empty room. Am I going to die here? Just a lonely old woman in a big empty house. I did not know it then. But that question was about to be answered in a way I never could have imagined. As I stood by the window, watching the fog roll in, my mind drifted back to a time before the silence took over. Daniel and I started our life in a cramped, second-floor apartment in Fallon Heights, a gritty industrial city where the air always smelled of burning rubber and rain. We worked double shifts, eating cold sandwiches over the sink, saving every dime we could find in the cushions. We shared a singular, glittering dream, a house by the ocean. Somewhere the air tasted like salt instead of smoke. The dream became complicated, as dreams often do. First came Liam, a quiet boy with Daniel's eyes. Then, years later, the surprise arrival of Jude and Hannah changed the geometry of our lives. The twins were loud, chaotic, and wonderful. The cost of diapers, tuition, and braces piled up like snowdrifts, turning our dream house in Riverton Bay into a massive financial anchor. We signed the mortgage papers with shaking hands, terrified, but determined to give the children the sunlight we never had. Then came that night, 10 years ago. It was supposed to be a celebration, a weekend boat trip to mark the twins' 16th birthday. I had stayed behind at the last minute to handle a crisis at Harbourline Securities, telling myself the overtime pay would cover the party expenses. The call came at 2 a.m. I remember the officer's voice was too gentle, too practiced. There had been an explosion on the water, no survivors. They found only debris and confirmed identities through DNA. The funeral was a blur of black umbrellas and closed caskets, a ceremony for 3 people I never got to say goodbye to. In the aftermath, my world collapsed into a single point of gravity, Liam. He was in his early 20s then, old enough to understand the loss, but young enough to need his mother. I poured every ounce of my remaining love into him. I clung to him as if he were the only rope keeping me from falling off the edge of the earth. For a while, he was there. He would come over after work to fix a leaking faucet or just to eat dinner in silence. We spent long nights sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by photo albums, weeping over pictures of Jude and Hannah blowing out candles. I miss them so much it hurts. I don't know how to keep breathing. I whispered to him once, my head on his shoulder. We just have to, Mum, he said, his voice thick with tears. We are all that is left. Then Harper entered the picture. She was a striking girl who had clawed her way up from a rough background, starting as a waitress before teaching herself to become a parenting consultant. She was polished, soft-spoken, and treated me with a reverence I found touching. She started calling me Mom Evelyn almost immediately. "You have raised such a wonderful man, Mom Evelyn." She told me during our first lunch, "I only hope I can be half the woman you are." I was so desperate for family that I let her in without hesitation. When they decided to marry, I insisted on paying for a lavish reception at the Hotel Seaside Monarch, dipping deep into my retirement savings to give them a fairy tale start. I wanted them to be happy. I wanted the house to feel full again. But shortly after the wedding, the tone changed. It was subtle at first. Harper would run her hand along the banister of the main staircase, frowning slightly. "This house is so beautiful, Mom Evelyn, but it is just so big for one person," she said one afternoon. "These stairs are steep. I worry about you taking a tumble when no one is around." Another time, she sat in the kitchen, sipping the tea I had made her. Liam and I were talking. "We just hate the idea of you being lonely in this giant place. It feels dangerous. Have you ever thought about how much equity is locked up in these walls?" I laughed it off back then. I thought she was being protective. A sweet daughter-in-law worrying about my safety. But looking back now, with the clarity of a woman who has found poison in her medicine cabinet, I realize my mistake. If I had looked closely at Harper's eyes in those moments, I would not have seen concern. I would have seen an appraiser measuring the square footage. She was not worried about my loneliness. She was calculating how long it would take to turn my grief into her inheritance. As the months bled into years, I began to feel the distance growing between Liam and me. A chasm widened by soft words whispered in the dark. Harper was subtle at first. She started planting seeds in Liam's mind, suggesting that my grief was a heavy anchor holding him back. She called it dependency. She told him that my phone calls during the day were intrusive, that my stopping by with leftovers was a violation of their marital boundaries. Liam changed. The son who used to sit on my floor crying over old photos was replaced by a man who checked his watch every 5 minutes when he visited. He began to answer my calls with a sigh. "Mom, I really cannot talk right now," he would say. His voice clipped and impatient. "We are busy." Dinner plans were cancelled at the last minute with vague excuses about late meetings or headaches. Night after night. I sat at the mahogany table, staring at 2 empty chairs, the silence of the house pressing against my eardrums. Then came the conversations about money. They started as casual complaints over coffee, but quickly turned into a rehearsed script. Harper would sit across from me, wringing her hands, talking about her student loans and the credit card debt that was suffocating them. She told me about a tech project Liam had invested in, a venture that had collapsed and taken $50,000 of their savings with it. I had not known about any of it until the money was already gone. One rainy Tuesday, Harper came over without Liam. She stood in my kitchen, tears streaming down her face, looking small and fragile. "Liam is in trouble at Bluebridge Studio," she sobbed, leaning against the granite counter. "He made a mistake on the blueprints for the downtown project. They might fire him. Mom Evelyn, I don't know what we're going to do. We could lose everything." She looked up at me, her eyes red and pleading. If we could just unlock the capital in this house, we wouldn't be backed into a corner. My heart broke for them. I immediately went to my purse. "I have my retirement savings at Harbourline," I said, my hands shaking. I can withdraw $20,000, maybe 30. I can write you a check today. Harper stopped crying instantly. Her hand shot out and covered mine, stopping me from reaching for my checkbook. No, Mum. You need that cash for your old age. We can't take your liquid assets. That is irresponsible. She smoothed her hair, her voice dropping to a reasonable, logical pitch. The money should stay where it is. It is better if we keep the wealth in real estate. Sustainable assets, under our management. She began to talk about the house not as my home, but as a future project. She walked through the living room, pointing out walls that could be knocked down. This could be the nursery, she said, gesturing to the study where Daniel used to read. And if we convert the garage, you could have a nice little in-law suite out there. It would be cozy for you. She was redesigning my life while I was standing right there, breathing and healthy. A week later, Liam brought up the deed. He did not look me in the eye. It is about tax protection. Mum, he said, reciting terms I knew he did not fully understand. If you transfer the title to us now, it saves a fortune in inheritance tax later. And, well, if you get sick suddenly, the government can't take the house to pay for care. We are just trying to protect the family asset. I looked at my son, then at Harper, who was watching me with the intensity of a hawk. I realized then that they did not see me as a mother. They saw me as a liability attached to a property. No, I said. The word hung in the air, heavy and solid. What Harper asked, her smile freezing, I said no. I am 56. I still work. I drive my own car. I am not invalid, and I am not ready to be a guest in my own home. This house stays in my name. The light in Harper's eyes went out. It was like someone flipped a switch. The warmth, the Mom Evelyn. The concern, it all evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hard stare. We were just trying to help you, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. From that day on, the visits stopped almost entirely. Harper no longer brought her homemade apple cake. She stopped sending photos of their vacations. I only received polite, generic text messages on holidays. I told myself they were just busy, that life gets in the way. I wanted to believe it was just a phase. I did not realize that by saying no, I had crossed a line. I was no longer family. I was an obstacle that needed to be removed. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon, the kind where the only sound is the wind rattling the loose panes of the greenhouse. I was in the backyard, wearing my thick gardening gloves, pruning the dead heads off the hydrangeas. My phone buzzed in my apron pocket. It was Liam. Hi, Mom, he said. He sounded breathless, like he was rushing somewhere. Listen, Harper and I are coming over for dinner. She feels terrible about how things were left last time. She wants to apologize. We want to make things right. That would be nice. Liam, I said, trying to keep the hope out of my voice. Great. We will see you at 7, he said. I have to go. I am driving. I walked into the kitchen, pulling off my gloves. I placed my phone on the marble island, right next to the cutting board. I must have pressed the red end call button too lightly, or perhaps the signal lagged. I did not notice that the screen remained lit. A second later, the small blue ring on the smart speaker in the corner, a gadget Liam had insisted on installing for me 2 years ago so I could listen to the radio pulsed with light. It had picked up the active call via the Bluetooth connection I never knew how to turn off. I turned to the sink to wash the sap from my hands when a voice filled my kitchen. It was not the radio. It was clear, amplified, and chillingly familiar. She will not suspect a thing. Harper's voice boomed from the speaker. You just pour the wine. I will handle the rest. When it mixes with her blood pressure meds, people will just think it is a stroke. I froze. The water was still running over my hands, cold and sharp, but I could not move to turn it off. I don't know. Harper! Liam's voice came through, sounding tinny and small. What if they do an autopsy? What if they find it? Oh, for God's sake. Liam, grow a spine. Harper snapped. I could hear the hum of the car engine in the background. Nobody performs a full toxicology screen on a woman pushing 60 who lives alone. She has high blood pressure. She complains about her heart. It fits the profile. It is a tragedy. Sure. But a natural one. My knees gave way, and I had to grip the edge of the sink to keep from sliding to the floor. The kitchen, usually my sanctuary, suddenly felt like a tomb. It feels wrong. Liam muttered. You know what feels wrong? Harper's voice dropped, becoming venomous, being bankrupt, losing our house. Do you want to live in a rental for the rest of your life? We do this, and we are free. Just keep driving. There was a pause. Then Harper spoke again, sharper this time. Hang up the phone. Liam? You did not hit the button. I do not want that stupid speaker in her house picking this up. There was a fumble, a curse, and then the line went dead. The blue light on the speaker faded to black. I stood there for what felt like an hour, though it must have been only minutes. The silence that returned to the house was deafening. I looked at my phone. The call log showed the connection had lasted 2 minutes longer than our conversation. It was real. I had not imagined it. My first instinct was to run. My second was to call the police. I reached for the phone, my fingers trembling so violently I could barely unlock the screen. But then I stopped. What did I have? A disconnected phone call, the word of a lonely, aging widow against a respectable young couple. I could hear the officers' voices in my head already. She is confused, she is grieving, she is paranoid. Without the recording, without the pill, without proof. I was just a senile old woman making up stories about her son. If I ran, they would find me. If I called the police too soon, they would talk their way out of it and come back later. Smarter and quieter. I needed to know more. I needed to see them do it. I took a deep breath, forcing air into my lungs. I walked to the mirror in the hallway. My face was pale, my eyes wide with terror. Pull it together. Evelyn? I whispered to my reflection. You have to smile. You have to be the mother they think is stupid enough to die. I went back to the dining room. I laid out the placemats. I polished the silverware until it gleamed. I set a place for Liam. I set a place for Harper. I set a place for myself. Then, moving with a strange, cold calm, I walked to the china cabinet. I took out a 4th crystal wineglass. I placed it on the table, right in the center. Not set for anyone in particular. It caught the evening light. A sharp, glittering object in the gloom. They would not know who it was for. They would not know that I was no longer just waiting to die. I was waiting for them. That evening, Harper arrived with a bottle of Cabernet she claimed cost $50. She insisted on pouring it herself, her movements sharp and precise. You need to relax. Mom Evelyn, she said, sliding the glass toward me. "It will help you sleep." I told them I was on a course of antibiotics for a sinus infection. It was a lie, but it was the only shield I had. When Harper turned to scold Liam for tracking mud on the rug, I tipped the contents of the glass into the large potted fern beside the window. I watched the dark red liquid sink into the soil, wondering if the plant would be dead by morning. Before they left, Harper placed a plastic bottle on the kitchen counter. "These are specialized supplements for bone density," she said, her voice dripping with faux concern. "I noticed you were walking a bit stiffly. Please, take them. For us." I waited until their taillights disappeared down the driveway before I picked up the bottle. The label looked generic, the printing slightly off-center. I went to my medicine cabinet and took out my regular blood pressure medication. I poured the pills onto the counter. 2 of them looked slightly different, a hair thicker, a shade lighter blue. The next morning, instead of going to my desk, I went straight to the medical supply room at Harborline to see Marisol. She has been a pharmacist for the company's internal health program for 15 years and is the only person I trust. I laid the vitamins and the blood pressure pills on her desk. Marisol inspected them under a magnifying light, then ran a quick chemical test on a small scraping. When she looked up, her face was grim. "The ones in your blood pressure bottle," she said, pointing to the slightly thicker pills. "They are potent beta blockers, but the dosage is tripled. And these vitamins, they contain a compound that interacts violently with beta blockers. Evelyn, if you took these together, it would stop your heart within an hour. It would look like cardiac arrest." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. This was not just greed. It was precision. Harper had done her homework. Marisol grabbed my arm. "You have to go to the police. Now." "I can't," I said. "Not yet. I need to know how deep this goes. I need to know if he is truly the one driving this." I went home, my mind racing. I needed clarity. I started digging through old boxes in the attic, looking for financial records, anything that might explain Liam's desperation. That was when I found it. Tucked at the bottom of a box of Daniel's old tax returns was a yellowed envelope I had received over a year ago. It was from a law firm in a different state. I had never opened it because the return address seal bore the initials D.M. Daniel Marlowe. I had thought it was a cruel prank or a clerical error, and I had been too afraid to look. Now, with death waiting in my medicine cabinet, I tore it open. Inside was a letter from a lawyer representing the Federal Harbor Program Witness Protection. My knees hit the floor as I read the words. The yacht explosion had been staged. Daniel had uncovered a massive embezzlement scheme involving organized crime at his old firm. To keep us safe, he and the twins had to die. But the threat assessment had changed. The syndicate had been dismantled. The letter said, "Your husband and children are alive. They have been living in safety for 10 years. They are waiting for your signal. Daniel did not contact you sooner because he believed you were complicit a lie fed to him by the corrupt partners to keep him silent. He thinks you chose the money over them." I sat on the dusty attic floor, clutching the letter to my chest, sobbing until I could barely breathe. They were alive. My Daniel, my Jude and Hannah. They were out there, thinking I had betrayed them, while I had been mourning them every single day. And now, the son I had cherished, the one I had stayed behind for, was trying to kill me. I looked at the letter, then at the empty house around me. I realized this was not just a piece of paper. It was a weapon. It was the key to a revenge so much sweeter than simple survival. I was going to get my family back. I bought a cheap prepaid phone at a convenience store 2 towns over, paying in cash to avoid any paper trail. My hands were trembling as I dialed the number from the lawyer's letter. We met the next day in a chaotic, noisy cafe in the city, the kind of place where conversations are swallowed by the hiss of espresso machines. The lawyer, a man named Mr. Sterling, leaned in close. They are in a small town called Larkridge, he told me. They are under the name Vance now. Daniel believes you received the first notification years ago and chose not to respond. He thinks you blame him for the danger that forced them into hiding. I felt a surge of nausea. For 10 years, I had mourned them, while my husband believed I had abandoned him out of spite. It took 2 days of agonizing travel and security checks before I stood in front of a rented cabin on the outskirts of Larkridge. When the door opened, the air left my lungs. Daniel was older, his hair streaked with silver, his face lined with the weight of a decade of secrets. "Evelyn," he whispered, his voice cracking. I thought you never wanted to see us again." I collapsed into his arms, sobbing until my throat burned. But the true shock was seeing Jude and Hannah. They were no longer the 16-year-olds I remembered. They were 24, adults with guarded eyes and stiff postures. At first, they stood back, looking at me like I was a ghost or a traitor. "You let us die," Jude said, his voice low and angry. "We watched the news. You buried empty coffins. You moved on. I didn't know." I cried, reaching for them but stopping short. "I didn't know you were alive. I have spent every day of the last 10 years wishing I had died on that boat with you. We spent the entire night talking. We sat on the floor of that cabin, just like we used to, peeling back the layers of misunderstanding. I told them about the funeral, the empty house, the silence. They told me about the fear, the name changes, the constant looking over their shoulders. By dawn, the walls had crumbled. Jude let me hold his hand. Hannah rested her head on my shoulder. They called me Mom again, and the sound of it healed parts of me I thought were dead forever. Then, I told them why I had finally opened the letter. I told them about the pills. I told them about the phone call I had overheard. I told them about Harper's voice on the speaker and Liam's silence. Daniel's face went white, then red with rage. "We leave," he said, standing up abruptly. "We pack up right now. We get you out of there. Evelyn, we disappear again. All of us. We won't let Liam come near you." "No," I said. My voice was steady, surprising even me. I looked at my husband and my twins. I have spent 10 years running from ghosts. I am not running anymore. I am not going to let my son and his wife kill me for a house that belongs to this family. I explained my plan. It was risky, but it was the only way to end this. We agreed to keep their survival a secret from the public for just a little longer. Mr. Sterling connected us with a private investigator he trusted, a man who could install hidden cameras and microphones throughout my house while I was out running errands. I returned to Riverton Bay 3 days later, my heart pounding, but my face a mask of exhaustion. I began to play the part Harper had written for me. I called into Harborline and requested a leave of absence, citing health issues. I called Harper, making sure my voice sounded frail and confused. "Harper. I don't know what is wrong with me," I said into the phone, letting a slight tremor enter my tone. "I feel so dizzy lately. I keep forgetting where I put things." "Oh, Mom Evelyn." Harper cooed on the other end. and I could practically hear her smiling. You just need to rest. Stick to the medication schedule I gave you. We will be over soon to check on you. That night, I sat in my living room, looking at two photographs. One was the old, sun-faded picture of us on the yacht, moments before the explosion. The other was a grainy selfie we had taken in the cabin at Larkridge just yesterday. I touched the faces of my living children. Come and get me. I whispered to the empty room. I am ready for you. Harper watched my decline with the predatory focus of a hawk circling a wounded rabbit. My feigned confusion and tremors were working. She began stopping by every other day, not to visit, but to audit. You are mixing these up again. Mom Evelyn, she said one afternoon, standing in my bathroom. Let me organize these for you. I will put everything in a weekly dispenser so you do not have to think about it. Oh, thank you, dear, I said, my voice trembling just enough. My eyes are not what they used to be. I let her take over the medicine cabinet. She did not know that hours earlier. I had replaced every single pill in those bottles with harmless placebos Marisol had prepared for me, and she certainly did not know about the micro camera I had hidden inside the box of tissues on the vanity. Later that evening, I watched the footage on my laptop. It showed Harper deftly swapping the contents of my blood pressure medication with the tainted pills she had brought in her purse. She did it with a terrifying efficiency, humming a little tune as she prepared to kill me. Liam was unraveling. The feed from my front door camera showed him pacing on my porch when he thought I was asleep. He was drinking from a flask, his face grey with stress. The bank had been calling the house looking for him. He was behind on everything. Harper had him convinced that I was the only thing standing between him and financial ruin. But the investigator's report told a different story. The file lay open on my desk. It contained photos of Harper entering a budget motel on the edge of town with a man who was definitely not my son. She was not planning to save Liam. She was planning to secure the house and the insurance payout, then leave him drowning in the debt she had helped create. The investigator had also found a life insurance policy taken out in my name 6 months ago. The payout was $1 million. Harper was the sole beneficiary. I decided it was time to pull the string tight. I invited Harper to lunch and waited until the coffee was served. I have been thinking about what you said, I told her, stirring sugar into my cup. About the future. I am meeting with a lawyer next week to update my will. I want to make sure the house goes exactly where it should, to ensure you and Liam are fully protected. Harper's fork froze halfway to her mouth. You are updating it, did you? Did you change the terms yet? Not yet. I said vaguely, but I want to be thorough. I want to make sure no one can contest it. Panic flickered in her eyes. If I died before the will was updated, the house would go to Liam by default. But if I updated it and left it to charity, or if she suspected I knew something, her plan would collapse. She needed me dead, and she needed it to happen before that lawyer appointment. That afternoon, she called Liam. My kitchen bug picked up her side of the conversation. She is talking about the will. Liam, she is getting paranoid. We cannot wait. If she goes to a lawyer, she might be lucid enough to change things. We need to do this now. Later. She sat on my sofa, holding my hand, her thumb rubbing my knuckles. You know, Mom, she said softly. Liam and I were talking. We worry about your quality of life. Sometimes letting go a little sooner is better than waiting until you are rotting away in a nursing home. It is a mercy, really. I had the recorder running in my pocket. I suppose you're right, Harper, I said. I am so tired. Let us have a nice dinner to cheer you up, she suggested, her eyes bright. Friday night. Just family. We will bring everything. Friday sounds perfect, I said. The trap was set. On Thursday morning, I sat in a quiet office downtown, far from the prying eyes of Riverton Bay. Mr. Sterling slid a thick document across the mahogany desk. It was a complex trust structure drafted to bypass probate entirely. Are you sure about this, Mrs. Marlowe? He asked. Once you sign this, the property and all assets transfer immediately into the trust managed by Daniel, Jude, and Hannah Vance. I am sure, I said. I picked up the pen. With a steady hand, I signed away the house that Liam wanted so desperately. I signed away the money Harper would kill for. I transferred everything to a dead husband and 2 dead children. By the time my son and daughter-in-law walked through my door tomorrow night, they would be trying to murder a woman who owned nothing but the clothes on her back. I capped the pen and looked at Mr. Sterling. Let them come, I said. The house felt heavier that night, as if the air pressure had dropped in anticipation of a storm. I sat alone at the kitchen table, the silence pressing against my eardrums. Spread out before me were the pieces of a game I never wanted to play. There was the bottle of expensive Cabernet Harper had brought, now emptied of its poison and refilled with harmless wine. There was the bottle of vitamins she had left, and the vial of my blood pressure medication. They looked so innocent under the warm glow of the pendant light. Just plastic and glass. Yet they were the weapons my family had chosen to use against me. I pulled a piece of stationery from the drawer and uncapped my pen. My hand shook as I wrote the date. It was a fail-safe letter addressed to Daniel. Jude and Hannah? I wrote clearly, ensuring every word was legible. If I do not make it through tomorrow night, I wrote, you must take the recordings and the pills to the police immediately. Do not protect Liam. I have accepted that the son I raised is gone. I sealed the envelope and placed it under the fruit bowl. A beacon for the living should I become the dead. At 9 o'clock, I retrieved the burner phone from its hiding spot inside a hollowed-out cookbook. I dialed the secure number for the video call. When the screen flickered to life, the pixelated faces of my husband and twins filled the small display. They looked anxious, huddled together in the dim light of their rental in Larkridge. You look so small in that big kitchen. Evelyn, Daniel said, his voice thick with worry. We should come now. We could be there in 3 hours. No, I said firmly, though my heart ached to say yes. You have to wait. If you come too early, they will panic and leave. We need them to sit down. We need them to say it. To admit it, while the cameras are rolling. It is dangerous. Mom, Jude said, leaning closer to the camera. What if they try something else? What if we are too late? I have the panic button the detective gave me, I assured them, touching the small device in my pocket. I will see you at dinner. Just be ready. I ended the call before my resolve could crumble. I walked into the dining room. The private investigator had been here while I was at the lawyer's office. He had installed a high-fidelity voice recorder beneath the center of the mahogany table and a pinhole camera inside the brass fixture of the chandelier. The room was a stage, wired for sound and vision. I moved to the china cabinet and took out the silverware. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I was setting a trap for my own son. Memories uninvited and sharp flooded my mind. I remembered the nights after the funeral 10 years ago, when Liam would crawl into my bed because the house was too quiet. We would hold each other, shaking with grief. I remembered the way he looked at me then, as if I were the only solid thing in a dissolving world. "Where did you go?" "Liam?" I whispered to the empty room. "When did you decide I was worth more dead than alive?" I opened the old photo album on the sideboard. I stopped at a picture taken the summer before the accident. Liam was sitting on Daniel's shoulders, laughing, while Jude and Hannah hugged my waist from behind. We looked invincible. I touched Liam's smiling face. I realized then that tomorrow was not just about revenge. It was a declaration. I was choosing to survive. I was choosing the husband and children who had lost everything to protect us, over the son who was willing to destroy me for a payout. I went upstairs and turned off the location services on the prepaid phone. I wrapped it in a soft cloth and tucked it deep into the back of my underwear drawer. I could not risk Harper or Liam finding a signal trace. Back downstairs, I began to set the table. I placed a placemat for Liam. I placed one for Harper. Then, with a deliberate, ritualistic slowness, I placed 2 more settings at the head and side of the table. I laid out the forks, the knives, the spoons. I polished the wine glasses until they sparked. These empty seats were not just negative space. They were placeholders for the ghosts who were coming home. At midnight, panic struck me like a physical blow. I stood by the phone, my hand hovering over the receiver. I wanted to call Liam. I wanted to scream at him. "I know everything. Please, just don't come tomorrow. I forgive you. Just stay away." I wanted to save him from the ruin that was waiting for him. But then I looked at the kitchen counter. I saw the bottle of pills Harper had tampered with. I heard her voice in my head, cold and indifferent, echoing from the recording I had listened to a dozen times. No one will remember a lonely old woman. I pulled my hand back. The time for saving Liam had passed. He had made his choice when he agreed to put poison in my wine. I did not sleep. I sat in the wing-back chair by the window, watching the night turn to grey. Slowly, the sun began to rise over the bay. The first pale light of morning filtered through the sheer curtains of the dining room. It washed over the long table, illuminating the 4 sets of silverware and the empty chairs. The stage was set. Tonight, the house would be full. And when the sun rose again, none of us would be the same people we were right now. Liam and Harper arrived just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, bruised shadows across the porch. Harper held a baking dish covered in foil in one hand and a bottle of white wine in the other. "I made lasagna," she said, offering a tight, plastic smile. "And a nice Pinot Grigio. I thought white would be lighter, better for your digestion." I saw the way her eyes darted to the bottle as she set it on the entryway table. There was a glimmer of anticipation there, a hunger that made my stomach turn. Before I closed the door, I reached into the deep pocket of my wool cardigan and pressed the small button on the recording device. I felt the tiny vibration against my hip. The trap was armed. We moved to the dining room. The air was thick, suffocating. Liam looked pale, his eyes scanning the corners of the room as if he expected someone to jump out. He did not know about the camera inside the chandelier above his head, nor the microphone taped beneath the mahogany table. "Sit, please," I said, gesturing to the places I had set. Harper served the lasagna. It smelled of garlic and oregano. But to me, it smelled like guilt. As we ate, the silence stretched thin until it was almost painful. "I have been doing a lot of thinking lately," I said, keeping my voice soft, reflective, about the future, about this house, about whether I am destined to be alone here forever. Harper perked up instantly, like a shark sensing blood in the water. She leaned forward, her fork hovering in the air. "That is exactly what we worry about. Mom," she said, "this place, it is a hazard. What if you fell in the shower? What if you had an episode and no one was here to help? The hospitals around here are terrible for people who come in without family to advocate for them. It is a nightmare scenario." Liam nodded, staring at his plate. "She is right. Mum, we just want you safe." I took a sip of water, letting the silence hang for a moment. "I know you do," I said. "That is why I called my lawyer this morning. I told him I wanted to update my will. I want to make sure that when I go, every penny and every brick of this house goes to the only person who truly loved me enough to stay." Harper froze. Her eyes went wide, and I could see the panic rising in her throat. She clearly thought I meant someone else, a charity, a distant cousin, anyone but them. You updated it," she stammered. "But who? Surely you mean family is a complicated word." "Harper," I said. She moved quickly then. She grabbed the wine bottle and uncorked it with trembling hands. "Let's have a drink," she said, her voice high and brittle. "To family. To making the right choices." She poured a generous amount into my glass. "I really shouldn't," I said, feigning hesitation. "With my medication." "Oh, one glass won't hurt," she insisted, pushing it toward me. "It will help you relax. You seem so tense." I lifted the glass. I watched them watch me. Liam looked away, unable to witness the moment, but Harper stared right at my lips. I brought the rim to my mouth, tilted the glass, and pretended to swallow. In the same motion, I brought my linen napkin up to wipe my mouth, spitting the liquid into the thick fabric and letting the rest of the wine from the glass tip discreetly into the napkin bunching on my lap. I lowered the empty glass to the table. "Delicious," I whispered. Harper exhaled, a long, shaky breath. She thought she had won. She thought the clock was ticking. "Liam," I said, my voice suddenly sharp, "if I died tonight, right here at this table, how would you feel?" Liam looked up, startled. "Mom, don't talk like that. Answer me," I demanded. "Would you be sad? Or would you just be relieved that the house is finally yours?" He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked at his wife, then back at me, his face crumbling. Harper cut in, her voice like ice. "Stop it, Evelyn. He loves you. But honestly, at least you wouldn't have to worry about being abandoned anymore. Dying early is sometimes a mercy compared to rotting away in a house that is too big for you." I leaned back, staring her down. "Is that what you think? That I will die lonely if I keep holding on to this life?" Harper sneered, dropping the mask entirely now that she believed the poison was in my veins. "You will die lonely in this house if you keep pushing us away. Evelyn, it is inevitable." The last syllable of her sentence was still hanging in the air when the sound of the front door opening shattered the atmosphere. Heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. Harper spun around in her chair. Liam stood up, knocking his fork to the floor. A deep, familiar voice boomed from the doorway. "It is a good thing we arrived in time to make sure that does not happen." Daniel stepped into the light of the dining room. He was tall, solid, and very much alive. Behind him, Jude and Hannah stepped out of the shadows, their faces grim. The colour drained from Harper's face so fast, she looked like a corpse. Liam made a sound, a choked, strangled whimper, as he looked at the father and siblings he had buried 10 years ago. The crystal goblet slipped from Harper's fingers and shattered against the hardwood floor, sending shards of glass and wine exploding outward like a grenade. Liam shot up from his chair, his face draining of all colour until he looked like a wax figure. He staggered back, his eyes darting frantically from the doorway to the table. "Dad," he whispered, the word barely escaping his throat. Then his gaze shifted to the two young adults standing behind his father. Jude. Hannah? He looked as though he were seeing ghosts, and in a way, he was above us. The camera, hidden in the chandelier, silently recorded every twitch of terror on his face. Daniel stepped fully into the room. He pulled a laminated card from his jacket pocket and slid it across the table toward Harper. "My name is Arthur Vance," he said, his voice shaking the walls. "At least, that is what the United States government calls me. But I am the father you buried 10 years ago. I am here with federal authorization, and I have heard enough." Jude and Hannah did not say a word. They simply walked around the table and stood behind me, placing their hands on my shoulders. It was a physical wall of loyalty that Liam could never breach. I stood up and moved to stand beside my husband. I looked at Harper, who was trembling so violently her teeth were chattering. "You told me I would die lonely." "Harper," I said, my voice steady and cold. "But tonight, standing here with the people who faked their own deaths to fight for justice, I think the loneliest person in this room is not me." I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and placed it in the center of the table. I pressed play. Harper's voice, recorded from the car, filled the dining room. Nobody performs a full toxicology screen on a woman pushing 60. We do this, and we are free. The silence that followed the recording was absolute. The doors to the living room swung open. The private investigator stepped out, followed closely by 2 police officers in plain clothes. They had been waiting there for an hour. One officer moved efficiently to the table, bagging the wine bottle, the vitamin jar, and the vial of pills as evidence. The other officer walked straight to Harper. "Harper Marlowe," he said, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent." Harper screamed. It was a primal, ugly sound. She scrambled backward, knocking over her chair. No, it was him she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at Liam. "It was his idea. He is the one with the debts. He forced me to do it. He is the one who wanted the house." Liam collapsed to his knees on the rug. He was shaking his head, tears streaming down his face. "No. No. Mom. Please. I didn't mean for it to go this far." I looked down at him. The recording of his own voice agreeing to the plan was still echoing in the room. "You didn't mean for it to go this far?" I asked quietly. "You meant for me to be dead by morning." I picked up the document Mr. Sterling had prepared. "You did all of this for a house you were never going to get." "Liam, I signed a new will yesterday. This house, the insurance money, my savings, it all belongs to the Vance family trust now. You were disinherited the moment you decided I was an obstacle instead of your mother." The police officer turned to me, his notebook open. Mrs. Marlowe, we have enough to book her immediately. But regarding your son, do you want to file criminal charges against him as a co-conspirator? It is your call. The room held its breath. This was the moment. I could send him to prison for 20 years. I could let the system swallow him whole. I looked at Daniel, then at the twins. They were waiting for me to choose. Prosecute her to the fullest extent of the law, I said, pointing at Harper. She is the architect. As for him, I looked at Liam, kneeling on the floor. A broken man. Prison was too easy. He is a cooperating witness, I said. He will tell you everything, but here is my condition. He walks away with nothing. He surrenders all claims to any family assets, and he enters mandatory court-ordered therapy. If he misses one session, or if he ever tries to contact us again without permission, I will sign the warrant and send him to jail myself. The officers hauled Harper to her feet. She was still screaming curses at Liam as they dragged her out the front door. Liam stayed on his knees, burying his face in his hands, sobbing my name. Mom. Mom. I'm so sorry. Daniel put a hand on Jude's chest to stop him from lunging at his brother. We stood there, a united front, watching the police lead the wreckage of my former life away. I stood at the head of the table, surrounded by my husband and my twins. I was not dead. I was not lonely. As the flashing blue lights from the police cruisers washed over the dining room walls, I realized that true loneliness was not living alone in a big house. True loneliness was what Liam was about to face, a life where he had to wake up every single morning and remember that he had traded his mother's love for a gamble he lost. Thank you so much for listening to my story, and I really hope you enjoyed this journey with me. Please drop a comment down below and let me know where you are tuning in from. I would love to hear from you guys. If you want to support the channel, please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, smash that like button, and hit the hype button so more people can hear these stories.